Hello and welcome to this session. So we'll jump straight up into the practical session. So I'm going to open another session here. I'll duplicate this session. Now I'll enter into the Hive shell. So to enter into the Hive shell, you simply type Hive and enter, and then it will enter into your Hive shell. So all right, so we are in the Hive shell. So first thing that we want to do is we want to create a database. So let's say we want to create a database called as practice. Again, this is very similar to your normal database. Create database name. We will create practice database. So we have the practice database. Now to use this practice database, we use practice. Again, same thing that we have done in the MySQL as well. No difference, right? Now what happens is whenever any database or any new table is created, by default Hive is going to create a directory, and the default location is user Hive warehouse. So if I go to this location, I should see two folders. I should see a folder getting created. So you can see this, right? This is a folder that got created, practice.tp. So every time a table is getting created or table gets created, you will have a folder getting created under this default location. In the coming sessions, we will see how we can use some other external location, but this is the default location that that the Hive uses to create the folder. So now that we have created the database, the next thing that we want to do is we want to create a table. Okay, let's do something. Let's create a customer table. So what we will do is this is my MySQL, and I'm going to create this customers table. So if I do a describe, so I have, these are the fields that I have. So I'm going to create a Hive table with the same structure as I have in the customers. So it's quite simple. It's very similar to how you create your normal relational database table. So you give the create table name, and you give the table name here. Then you mention the column names here. So I'll just copy these columns from here. If you can see that almost most all of them are very same. I'm just copying this everything from the MySQL database here. All right, so this is normally how you create a table in your relational database. Right now, this is where it is a little bit different in Hive. So the table is, now you can create this table, but then underlying data is basically present in your file system, right? So now you have to mention how is that file, what is the delimiter of that file, and what is the type of the file, what is format of the file. So the first thing that we will do is we will say row format delimited, because the file that we have copied on the customers, it's a row delimited file. And how are the fields terminated? We have to mention this here, fields terminated by, we have copied a CSV format. So we have to mention fields terminated by. And again, the next is lines. How are these lines terminated by? This is /n, the new line. And stored as, how is your file stored as? So we are talking about the customers file that we exported from the MySQL, we copied into the edge node, from there we put it in the HDFS location. So if you remember that it was a comma delimited file with /n as the new line director, and then we stored this as a text file. We have seen those files, right? So this is how you create a table. So if I enter, now my table is created. So I will go back here, and if I do an HDFS on the Hive user warehouse, you should also see one more folder being created. It should be under this. Let me do this. So under practice database, you should see this table. Yep, the customers. So this is how it maintains the metadata and other information. So this is the default location of the Hive. So okay, let me go back. Okay, now we have, let me go back to the Hive. Right, so here we are. So if I do a show tables, it will show me the list of tables. So we only have customer tables here, right? So again, same thing that we will do in MySQLs. Now if I go and describe this table, describe my table which is customers, it should give me the schema of this. So it has all the column names and then the data type, but there is something else we can do. So if we can do something like describe formatted and then the table name, it will give me a little bit more details, like these are the column names that it has. It gives the owner name, other stuff, the location. So as I mentioned, this is the default location. Now all the data that we are going to put into this table is going to get loaded here in this default location. The table type, it says manage table. Basically there are two types of table, one is managed, one is external table. By default, if you don't specify anything, it is a managed table. We'll talk about the difference between managed and external in some other video. But then if you look at this, there are the SRD libraries, how the data is getting stored, your format and other stuff, and number of buckets and something that we will see at some other point, right? So anyway, so this is describe formatted. So it is very useful, and this is something that we are going to use very regularly. For the most important here is basically location. So this is something very important. So whenever you do a describe, you know, the first thing that you should do is check where the data is getting stored, right? So this way, you know, you can go back and, you know, check this data in the location that is specified here. All right, fine. Now what we will do is we are going to load the data into this table. Okay, so where is this data? It is basically in the you have the data in both HDFS location as well as HNode, but we will check this data in our edge node first. So under data sets, we have this data, so which is basically we have the customers, we have categories and other stuff. So we created the customers file. So what we will do is we will load this customers file into this table. So one of the way that we can do is using a command called load data. So we will say load data. This is the command. We wanted to use local system, so we says local, and then we give in path. So this is a path where that file is present. So it is under home Cloudera datasets, and we have to give the full path. This is the customers.csv. So this is a file into where, which table we wanted to insert. So our table name is customers. Okay, so load data local in path. This specifies that we want to load the data, but the data is in local. This is the location where my data is there, and this is the table that I want to insert my data. So if I press enter, this data is getting loaded, and it has already got loaded. All right, so if I do a simple select, I'll see all this data. So let me do a limit on this. Again, same set of queries that we use on your MySQL. You can also do a where clause. Let me do a simple where clause. I think this is customer ID, right? So let me check for customer ID is equal to 1. Okay, is it not customer ID? We can describe it. All right, so we have the customer ID details here. Okay, we missed the where clause here. That's the reason. Anyway, so simple queries that we can do. There are other group by queries as well. All of them will work. So uh, let me describe this table again. Now, if you look at this, I can do a simple group by as well on this. So let me say I want to do a group by on state. I want to see how many records we have for a particular state. So I'll say count of star. And it will invoke your MapReduce job, and because it's a group by, it is going to take some time. So we have this result here. So very similar to how your normal SQL query. So if you know SQL, it's very easy to learn Hive. You just create the table and you do your normal SQL queries, and most of the time it is going to work. Okay. So what I'll do now, I'll do a describe formatted again. And I'll go to this location. So this is the location where my data is getting stored. Okay, so I'll have to go here. Let me go here. All right, so you can see here that data is getting that data got loaded here. So if I do a cat, so from this is where the data is getting loaded into this table. When we do a select query, this is where the Hive query is picking this data, right? So this is how we load the data. So we have loaded the data from your local system or your edge node into your Hadoop table or into your Hive table, right? So we can also do the same from your HDFS location as well. So what I will do is let me just open here. So this is a command we use to load the data from edge nodes. So now if we want to load the data from your HDFS location, the first thing that we have to do is we have to remove this local. Now this means the data is getting, this means that the data will be loaded from your HDFS location. But your HDFS location, we have to change your HDFS location. It is basically user Cloudera, right, into this table. This is where your data is present. We copied the data here. Let me quickly check that to see if there are any spelling mistakes. So I'll do a simple ls command to see if the file exists there. That will be an easier way to identify if there are any spell mistake. Okay, it looks like there is some spell mistakes. I think we created the directory as well, right? So great. So this should work. Yeah, so we created the directory and we loaded the in each of this directory. Yeah, so here I have to mention customers and into this custom, right? So if I execute this, it is getting loaded. It has already loaded the data from the HDFS location into the customers table. Okay, so if I do a select star, or let me do a describe, or rather so we have this location anyways here. So let me just go and check this if any new file has been added. It should get added. You should see two files here. One was this was a file that we loaded basically from your local, and this was a file which we loaded from your HDFS location. There is some difference when you load the data from your local system and when you load the data from your HDFS location. So what happens from your local system is when you load the data from your edge node, data is basically copied to your Hive warehouse location. But when you load the data from your HDFS, data is actually moved. So the original location, original data is actually lost in HDFS. So we can verify this. So this was the location, of the HDFS. So if I do an HDFS here, I will not see this data because this data was moved. It was not copied, rather it was moved, right? There is no such data. But if I do an LSLTR, you will see that this data is still there in the local system. So that's a basic difference. When you use a load command, the data, if you're using the in path as local, it will copy this data from your local system, which is edge node, to your warehouse location, higher warehouse location. But if you're using the in path for HDFS location, it is going to move the data. So that's the basic difference between loading the data from your HDFS location to loading your data from your local system, right? So what we will do is, let us just copy this data there. If you want to copy from local, so we say copy from local. So this is the file that I wanted to copy, and I want to copy it here. This is where I want to copy it. All right, so we have copied this data from local system into the HDFS. Let me just verify this one more time to see if the data is available. All right, so we have this data. So that's the basic difference. Please do remember, if you're copying this data, if you're loading the data from your edge node, the data is basically copied. But if you're if you are using an inload to load the data from your HDFS location, data will be moved. It's a very important difference that you need to understand, right? Okay, so moving ahead. Now we have mentioned that when you load the data in the table, basically it means the data is loaded in some HDFS location. In this case, the data is basically loaded here. The customer data is basically loaded here. So let me go here, and when you query the table, when you query the Hive table, data is basically loaded from here. So let me just quickly go back and do a query on Hive. I'll do a simple select count of star. All right, so we have 24,878 records. Now this is what we have here. So what I will do is I'm going to delete this particular file. When you delete this particular file, that data is not available. So it should reflect in your Hive query as well. So I'll do this. I will do an remove command, and this data will get deleted here. So the data is deleted. Now I'll go back to my Hive, and I'm going to do another count of stars. So earlier we had 24,878, so we deleted one file. Basically it's the same file, so you should ideally be seeing the half of it, which is some 12,400 something. There you go, it's 12,439. That's half of it. Now what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll delete the remaining file. So when you have when you remove the other file as well, so when you query this data, that it has nothing in the HDFS location, so it should return you 0 records. So we deleted this data. So now instead of using a count of star, I'll simply use select star from customer. So this will be rather easy. So we got, so no records here. So basically this is how the Hive works. So you have the data stored in the HDFS location, and then Hive is going to pick up this data from that location, and it is going to show it up to you on screen, right? So this is the basic concept of Hive. When we looked at the features of Hive, we saw something like schema on read. So there we mentioned that you, even though if you have a mismatch between your file system within your data and your Hive table, it will still allow the data to be inserted. So let's test that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a simple table, and I'm going to have just one column in this. So I will call this table as order underscore example, let's call it this way, and I will only create one column in this. It's a row formatted delimiter. Basically the orders, we are basically referring to the orders file that we have loaded. Fields are basically terminated by comma, lines are terminated by slash n new line. This is stored as test file. All right, this is great. Okay, the table is now created. If you do a describe formatted, so the table is basically created here. So you can see here a new folder got created under practice.db. So this is great. Now what we will do is we are going to load some data, and the data that we want to load is if this is the location. So this is the data that we want to load, orders data. Now if you do a head on this orders, you see this is one column, this is second column, third and fourth. So we have four columns, but then the table we created basically has just one column. So you're trying to insert the data into a table, but you have four columns while the table can only accept one column. Normally if you do in a relational database like Oracle or MySQL, it will fill right there, right? But here this is where the difference is. If I do this, let me load data local, because it is in my local edge node, and here is the location of this file, and the file name is orders.csv, and into table, the table name is order underscore example. So this is a table that so it has loaded. So if you can see here, right, the data is loaded. Now if you go to this location, this is where the data is getting stored. So if you go to this location, you will see that file present here. So data is present, right? So you have this data. So if you cat this data, you will see the same data that we have loaded, right? Yeah, so it has all the four columns. This is great. So the data is available, but if you do a query, if you select this query, you can see here, right, it has only picked up one column data. There is no failure here, right? Because you have four columns data, but your because your table has just one columns, it just picked up one column, it just picked up the first column data. In your traditional skill, this could be a failure. So your schema is basically applied when you are reading this data, even though it allowed you to load four columns data, but then when you're reading the data, your schema says just one column. That's why you are seeing just one column of data, right? So this is what we are mentioning about the schema on read. Now let me do another describe. Okay, so you see here the table type is managed table. So what is managed table is basically the difference between managed and external is, in managed table, if you drop a table, it is going to drop the schema, as well as it is also going to drop the data associated with this. Now if you see here, the data is present right here, right? We have just verified the data is present, but if you drop this table, this data is also getting dropped. That is what managed table is. An external table, as we will see in the coming sessions, that's not the case, but let's limit ourselves to a managed table. So I will say drop table. Okay, so my table is dropped. So if you do a select star from this table, or you do a describe, you should see something like this: table is not found. So similarly, if I go and check if the data is present here, if the file is present here, I should see a similar error here, that the file or a folder or directory is not present. So this is what happens in a managed table. So you have to be very careful when you create a table, because your underlying files may also be lost if you're dropping and recreating a table. So this is a very common scenario in your relational database. Sometimes a new schema comes up, so you want to drop the existing table, copy this data somewhere else, create a new table. So you can do the same thing here with manage table, but there is a better way of doing that. But anyways, when you drop the table, the underlying data will be dropped. That's the concept that I wanted you to understand right now. Okay, let's do one more thing. Let's create one more table. So I'm going to use a create table. I'll create the categories table. So this is the same table that we have in the MySQL. So if you describe the categories, you'll see like there are 3 columns. So I'll quickly create those 3 columns. This has would be an easier way for me to just copy it and paste it. Right. So we have all those 3 columns. Now what we have to do is we have to mention the row format. So row format is delimited. Fields are terminated by it's a CSV file. It's terminated by comma, and lines terminated by /n, the new line character. And this is stored as text file. This is how we have created the tables in our previous examples, right? What I will do is I'm going to use something called as location. So what it means is it just tells the Hive that, right, my table, this particular table data exists in this particular location. So whatever location that I give here, it should be an HDFS location. Table is going to retrieve the data from that location. So I'm going to use this user. So this is the location that I'm going to use, user cloud data dataset categories. So you have to give up to directory name. So whatever the files are which are present under the directory, all those files will be pulled when you do a query. Okay, so this is something that we have copied in earlier sessions. So I'll give that location, right? So now what it means is I have a table called as categories. It has this is a schema of that category. It is a row format delimited, and fields are terminated by comma. It's a text file, and the location of this file is, this is the location, this is where my data is residing. So the table is now created. So if I do a describe formatted, you should see this. So you should see that the table location is updated. So the table location is basically this one, right? Okay, so now you can do a simple select query. So it's a table name categories. Okay, all right. So you have this table data. So this is another way where we can create this table. Now what happens if the location that you mentioned does not exist, right? Here we have already created this location, so we use this location. So but if the location does not exist, what will happen is it will create this location. So let's say you have up till here, so it's gonna create this categories folder, and then you will have to load this data into this. So you can use the load in path, and you can basically load this data into this location. Now you can also create a table with the existing table. So again, this is something that we used to create a lot, in your SQL. When you do an SQL, when you are writing your queries in a traditional database, you would have come across a scenario where you want to create a table which has similar data types or similar structure as the existing table. So instead of doing a create table again, you would basically use create table as, and then you use a query. So if I use select star from categories, it is going to create it is going to create a table with the category structure, and it is going to copy the data from category, right? So the map reduce job is invoked now, and the data table will be created, as well as the data from the categories will be copied into the category underscore example. All right, so we have the table created. So let me do a select count of star on this table first. So we have 58 records here. So what I'll do is we can also insert this data into this. So we can say insert into this table. And we will use select star again, select star from categories. So it is going to select the data from categories and it is going to insert this data. So what will happen is you already have 58 records. It will again copy those 58 records from categories, so it's going to append to the existing table. So you should have 58 plus 58, that should be 116. Okay, so we have this data now, so let me quickly go ahead and write. So we are executing the select count, and this should be 58 plus 58, it should be 116 records that we should have. All right, so we have 116 records. So when you insert the data, it is basically appending it. So what if we just want to overwrite it, right? So instead of inserting or appending the data, we just want to overwrite it. So what we can do here is, so this is a command that we have used. So instead of insert into, we will say insert overwrite. So that's the only change. So when you do this, it is going to remove the existing data, it is going to fed it with the new data, so it is basically going to override. Now your 116 data should now become 58 because that is the data that is available in the categories table. So the command is now complete, so I'll execute the count of star again. This override, if it works properly, you should have 58 records. Anyways, let's wait for this command to get executed, and we'll verify this data on the category example table. See, we have just 58 records here. So let me do a describe formatted. We haven't done this for the new table because this table was created from the original table, right? So this table is basically you have the same schema, everything, and you basically have the same database, but if you can see here, right, the location is your default location. The original table location was something else, right? You have user Cloudera, but when you create this table with another table, you didn't mention any location there when we created this table, right? So when you don't mention a location, it will take the default location. So the schema will be same as the original table, but then location will refer to the user Hive warehouse, which is the default location, right? So we have done a lot of things here. So we have created a lot of tables, we have loaded this data, we have queried this data, we have done the group bys, we have done simple select, and we have seen how the data is moving from edge node to HDFS. What is the impact of loading from your local system or your edge node, or what is into the table, or what is the impact of loading the data from your HDFS location to your Hive tables, and how we can create the tables, different ways of creating the tables. So very simple, very similar to how we do the SQLs, but a slight difference where we provide some additional details. But I hope this was clear to you guys, and I'll see you guys in my next class.